Hey guys, this is MTG Degree, and my name is Luke, and today we're going to talk about reading Bluffs and Tells in Magic the Gathering. Alright, so before we start this video, I kind of want to give a little disclaimer, which is that when you're talking about bluffs and you're talking about tells with your opponents, what you're doing is you're helping yourself in the very small ways. So don't expect that because you're good at bluffing or understanding their tells, that you are going to do really well. Understanding things like deck building, or the steps in combat and all that kind of thing, knowing your basics and your mechanics is much more important. So if you want to increase your skill just a little bit, this is a great way to do it, if you're really working on just getting those last few corners figured out. But don't expect that because you use all of these tips that you will just start becoming an unbeatable machine, right? Typically there's other areas that you can work on as well. So the first one is very simple, and it is to listen for size. So some players really wear their heart on their sleeve, you know, and if they get a bad draw, the sigh comes out right away, you know? So if you notice that whenever your opponent sighs, they really have nothing, then use that information to your advantage. And if, when they sigh, the next turn they have some amazing combat trick, then you know that they're kind of gaming you with their sighs. They're trying to sigh, that way you go shields down and just run into something horrible. The next one is to be aware of where your opponent looks. So let's say you're playing your turn and they never look at their hand once. That's probably a sign that they don't have anything in their hand, you know what I'm saying? Or, for example, if they look at their graveyard, maybe some delve shenanigans are going to go on. Or if they are looking at their mana base counting up, maybe they have something big, but they're not quite there yet. So let's say you have something like a stubborn denial or some jazz, then you can go ahead and leave that up and do a slower play on your side. That way you can blow them out when they try to cast their big stuff. The next tip is to take free information. It's free, and everyone loves free stuff. So, for example, let's say your opponent mills themselves. Go ahead and actually pay attention to what goes into the library. There might be something good there. The next thing is, and my personal favorite is, when your opponent says, "Look, I had you so dead. Look at all the stuff I could have killed you with if you didn't die there." Basically, all that stuff is free information where you get to, later on, work around those things. So if they show you that their ending hand had an arrow storm and you also just died to an arrow storm, next game you're probably going to work around an arrow storm, you know what I'm saying? So the next tip has to do with people playing land. So this is the person who plays land off the top of their library versus the person who brings it into their hand and then shuffles. So if somebody is playing land off of the top of their library, that just makes me super happy. So if I made an attack last turn and nothing happened, and they just played a land off the top of their library, well, guess what's not going to happen this turn? Anything interesting when I attack, you know what I'm saying? So definitely pay attention to whether or not they're playing land off the top of their library, or if they are shuffling it in. If they're shuffling it in, and this is a good tip for you as well, if they're shuffling it in, then you don't know if they had like 3 land in their hand, and they drew a land and played it, or if they had the land off the top of their library and they needed it, you know? So when you play, certainly always take it up and then shuffle. Even if you missed your land drop last turn, if they weren't paying attention too much, they might not know that you just drew a land, even though you missed a drop and then you played a drop. The next tip is to know when your opponent is on the ropes land-wise. So, if they're at 4 land in this 5 is very important format, or if you know that they're off their colors because you're on game 2 or 3, make some tempo plays that make it harder for them to keep creatures on the field, for example. So let me give an illustration. So let's say that you have a turn where you could either play a 3-drop, or you could whisk away something, okay? So in that scenario, let's say that they've got 2 land because they missed 1 and you've got 3, then attacking into them, hoping to whisk away, will be a much better tempo play, because then they'll draw that creature again. They'll still be at 2 land. You'll maybe be at 4 the next turn. You have that great tempo advantage instead of just playing the creature and then not attacking, so you don't really get much accomplished, you know? I mean, you are developing your board, which is important, but stifling them is more important, and that'll kind of work on their mindset, make it pretty hard on them. Alright, so the next tip is to be sort of ageist, or pay attention to when someone is a beginner or not. So if they are a beginner and they're leaving up some combat trick mana, it's more safe to assume that they don't have a combat trick, you know, that just they have a terrible hand, or like their mana base is weird because they haven't built many decks before, or that kind of thing. So when you're playing against beginners, don't over-read into them. You just want to play with what's on the board for the most part. And then when you're playing against older players and stuff, you can assume that they've got the game sort of figured out. And so you assume that they're on the same level as you, and you have to give them more of the respect than a newer player, where you might be more willing to attack in. Alright, so you're in a position where you have some mana open, alright? And you've been in that position for many turns. The way that you can really craft your mana to give your opponent an image is, if you can never spend it fully, then leave open the same stuff every time. So if you always leave up 1 green and 2 other colors, then maybe they're thinking that you're going to give your guy Awaken the Bear. Or if you're always leaving up 1 white and 2 others, they're thinking Kill Shot Sandblast type thing, alright? So by being very consistent with what you are leaving up, you're starting to put a card in their mind that is not there, and that's the perfect bluff. The next tip is to listen to your opponents. Of course, just to be respectful, you should always listen to them. However, if they're commenting on the board state, or a creature or something, pay attention to whether or not their comments end up being true. So, for example, I have played against a guy who, when you have a powerful creature that he can definitely kill, he'll always heap a little bit of praise on that creature, you know? And in that case, you can kind of play around with him, in the sense that if he can kill that creature, but he hasn't yet, maybe it's something like Kill Shot. Attack with other things if you can still keep up the pressure, and maybe he'll be forced to use it on another creature. Alright, so the next tip has to do with people keeping land in their hand. So, some people absolutely won't do it, you know? A great example is very young players, or naive players. So there is a very young kid that plays at my shop, and he plays pretty darn well, except that he wears his heart on his sleeve, and he never doesn't drop his mana, right? So you know whether or not his hand has gas in it just by its size. Whereas a more older or experienced player, you have very little idea, because they might be keeping a land or 2 in their hand to make it look like something's going on when it's not. And so kind of judging how naive your opponents are can give you a pretty big advantage. Alright, well, if these tips have been useful to you, then go ahead, hit the like, subscribe buttons. This has been MTG Degree. My name is Luke, and I'll see you next time.